Okay, well, everyone who was in the waiting room, I believe, is in, so I think we can probably get started. Hi, everybody. Um, my name is John Munro, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session, the next in our series, the New Roots in Transnational American Studies series of conversations. Um, and I teach at the University of Birmingham. I teach U.S. history there. And I'm also the co-director with Rona Cran. Rona's here. My colleague Rona Cran and I together run the Center for Global American Studies. So this session, Tip of the Spear, that we've been really looking forward to and are really excited about this very timely conversation, is one in a series. I'll just give a plug for the next. The next book that we'll have in the series is Sarah Goodyear, Doug Gordon, and Aaron Naparstek's Life After Cars. So this will be a book that we'll be having another conversation about in the coming months. Keep an eye out for that. But today we are here to talk about Tip of the Spear, as you all know. Ori's book, Black Radicalism, Prison Repression, and the Long Attica Revolt. So we've got a great lineup of people to speak to us about this. And we'll introduce them in just a moment. But my co-host today is Oussema Othmeni, who's here. And Oussema, maybe I'll turn it over to you for a minute just to introduce yourself.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this, what I'm sure will be a very interesting conversation about a very interesting book and a very interesting topic. My name is Oussema Othmeni. I teach American Cultural Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of Sousse. And I am also the Secretary General for the Tunisian Association for American Cultural Studies, which I'll say a few words about just to introduce it for those of you who don't know what TAX is. So the Tunisian Association for American Cultural Studies, or TAX, is a non-profit academic organization dedicated to the critical study of the United States of America from interdisciplinary perspectives, which are generally rooted in the humanities and social sciences as broadly defined. We try to bring together scholars, researchers, educators, while also promoting rigorous and academic engagement with American culture, history, politics, media, race relations, foreign policy, and so on and so forth, while also trying to critically address issues of power, representation, and globalization. TAX organizes conferences, study days, workshops, and pedagogical initiatives, while also trying to establish international collaborations to increase dialogue between Tunisia and the broader field of American studies and Americanists worldwide. And it is within this context that this book series is taking place. We're very happy, very proud with our partnership with Birmingham University's Center for Global American Studies, with John, who's been very helpful with this book series. This is one of many events. We've had many before, and I hope we'll have many to come. And I'll let John maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Super. Yeah. I mean, I'll just say that it's very much my pleasure to be have this partnership, and I'm delighted to that we get to benefit from it, really. And I've been to the tax annual conference twice now in Tunisia, and it's just a tremendous experience. I really recommend that people keep an eye out for calls for papers that they put out, and consider attending their events. I'll also say that it's really nice to be co-hosting today with you, Oussema. Usually, I co-host with Yosra, the regular co-host. I'll introduce Yosra properly in a moment. But I'll just say that when we were talking about doing this book, that we were excited, and Ori, we were hopeful that you might accept the invitation. And then Yosra said that would be good, but I actually want to be in the discussion. I don't want to just co-host for this one. So we kind of switched up the lineup here a little bit, and that's the reason why. So let me introduce Yosra and the other panelists here who are here to talk about the book. And each of them will speak for kind of 7 to 10 minutes. And then we'll turn to Ori for a response, and then we'll open it up for some broader conversation from there. But let me introduce our panelists, that this great lineup of panelists that we've got here today. So Yosra Amraoui is assistant professor of culture studies at the Higher Institute of Languages of Tunis. where she directs the master's program in English for Communication. She was a Harvard postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, where she worked on prison literature in the Maghreb, as well as global and comparative prison studies. She's published numerous articles on Tunisian prison narratives. She's currently the vice president of the Tunisian Association for American Cultural Studies. And again, as I mentioned, to my great good fortune, Yosra also regularly co-hosts this whole series, New Roots in Transnational American Studies, with me. We've also got Charisse Burden-Stelly, who we're also delighted to see and have here, who's associate professor of African American Studies at Wayne State University. She's the author of Black Scare, Red Scare, Theorizing Capitalist Racism in the United States. I'm guessing many of you will have read this book. If you have not, to do so. It's a must read, definitely. Charisse is also the co-editor of Organize, Fight, Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writings, and she's a member of the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective and Black Alliance for Peace. We're also delighted to have Matef Harmachis, who's an organizer working in Pan-African and Third World decolonization solidarity, education, and political prisoner liberation struggles. He spent 20 years as a journalist and editor, and then another 20 years at high schools teaching social science. He holds degrees in journalism, education, and law. His objective is to apply our collective knowledge and experience to the movement for social justice. And I should also add that Matef is also the co-editor with the one and only Diane Fugino, who I'm also delighted to see is here in the audience. They're co-editors together on the brilliant collection, Black Power Afterlives, The Enduring Significance of the Black Panther Party. And I'll also mention that Robin Maynard was scheduled to join us today, and we were also really excited about that. Robin is unfortunately not able to join us. She's dealing with something else at the moment. But I just thought I would introduce Robin anyways, even though she can't be here because we wish she was here. And if people don't know that much about her, though I imagine many of you do, I feel like it's just important to put this in there anyways so that people can get a greater sense of someone else who's in this wider conversation, even if they're not able to be here with us at the moment. So Robin Maynard is assistant professor of Black feminisms in Canada in the Department of Historical and Cultural Studies at the University of Toronto Scarborough. Her work looks at transnational Black feminist thought and Black social movements, policing, borders, and carceral studies, Black Indigenous histories and praxis, Black Canadian studies, as well as abolitionist and anti-colonial methodologies. You can find Robin's writing in a whole range of media outlets, academic journals, and scholarly anthologies. She's also the author, of course, of Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to the Present, which is now out in second edition. And she's the co-author with Leanne Bedesamasaki Simpson of Rehearsals for Living, a book that I've taught several times. One of those books, a fantastic read, but also a book I highly recommend for teaching in the classroom as well. So we're sorry Robin can't be here, but I think she's kind of here in spirit. So, Oussema, let me turn it over to you to introduce the author whose work we are here to discuss.
Thank you, John. Very happy to do that. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Orisanmi Burton, who is an associate professor of anthropology at American University. His research employs ethnographic and archival methods to examine historical collisions between Black radical organizations and state repression in the United States. Dr. Burton received his BA in Interdisciplinary Social Inquiry from Hampshire College, a Master's in Library and Information Science from Long Island University, and a PhD in Sociocultural Anthropology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Burton's work has been published in North American Dialogue, The Black Scholar, Radical History Review, American Anthropologist, among other outlets, and has received support from the Venner Gren Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and the Margaret Casey Foundation, which selected him as a 2021 Freedom Scholar. Dr. Burton's first book, entitled Tip of the Spear, Black Radicalism, Prison Repression, and the Long Attica Revolt, was published by the University of California Press in 2023. And this is the book that we are here to discuss. I would be happy to introduce the book briefly, John, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Yeah, so I honestly found this was a different experience for me reading this book. It's very interesting, very intriguing, and I'm honestly very much looking forward to a conversation today. And I do have some questions myself to ask to Dr. Burton about this. The book, in my opinion, it makes a powerful intervention into how we usually understand prisons and rebellion and state power with regards to this issue of prisons in the United States. It is not, in my opinion at least, it is not as simply a history of the Attica uprising or a study of prison reform, but it makes a much more radical claim, which is that prisons are a form of warfare. Prisons are war. They're not metaphorically violent institutions, but they are actually literal sites of racial and colonial warfare, of class warfare even, which in this sense, prisons are, according to the book, are central to a broader project of domination and counterinsurgency. Um, the book tends to fundamentally reframe Attica and the Attica revolt rather than treating it as a singular or a tragic event that happened during a 4 days period in September 1971. It actually uses it to theorize this idea of the long Attica revolt, which refers to, a protracted, much larger, much more comprehensive structure of rebellion that unfolded before, during, and continues to unfold even after the, Attica itself. And it also extends beyond prison walls into wider black radical and anti-colonial struggles. What I really enjoyed about the book was the distinctive nature of the knowledge that it values and depends on and it revolves on. The book takes really seriously the political analysis, theory, and historical narration that is produced by incarcerated black radicals themselves. They don't appear as merely victims of repression in the book, but as actors that are making reformist demands, or as actors that are making reformist demands, but as, in my opinion, they were part of the theorization that existed within the book. They appeared as combatant theorists. Because their letters, their speeches, their political education programs, even their organizing strategies formed the intellectual framework and backbone of the book, for that matter. Methodologically, also, tip of the spear, and this is also something very interesting, and I have a few questions maybe later about this. The book blends archival research with long-term oral history and ethnographic accountability. It treats state archives and rebel archives as antagonistic sources within what Dr. Burton calls an archival war. And this raises many questions about the nature of knowledge that we take for granted, that we tend to use without critical thinking, without critical reflection. And by following this idea of an archival war, the book exposes how really knowledge production itself becomes a terrain for struggle, a terrain for framing narratives. Tip of the spear, to keep this short, it asks us really to rethink some of our most familiar categories and our most common conceptions about crime, about punishment, about reform, about rebellion, and even about abolition itself. It challenges us, it challenged me at least, to rethink what abolition means, where it comes from, and how easily its revolutionary origins can be neutralized or even fragmented and forgotten. I do look forward to our discussion and to hearing more from Dr. Burton, more from our readers about this book. And I think we will hear more about the questions that this book opens rather than the questions that it resolves. And I think that's very interesting. And that's all I have to say about the book. And I'll give you back the floor, John.
Thanks, Oussema. That's just so helpful to have that kind of overview as we move into some more detailed considerations from our panelists. So perfect. Well, Yosra, why don't we turn it over to you to give the first kind of reader's response, as it were, to the book. Floor is yours, Yosra.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm not going to thank you, John, for inviting me because I crashed on this panel. But I'm going to thank you for offering me the book. You always do. This was very, very inspirational for me. Honored to be within such a lovely panel. People who are established in the field. I'm just humbled. But let me just start by telling you an anecdote of the time I went on a postdoctoral fellowship in the US 3 years ago. to conduct a comparative study between Maghrebin and American political prison literature. The first discussions I had with people there in the US, academics that is, from Harvard, from Massachusetts State University, multiple research centers, people were asking me about my research, and when I told them it's about, comparing, trying to find parallels between Maghrebin and American political prison literature, people were like, uh, uh, prison literature in the US? I don't think we have that. And then they were like, American political prison literature, maybe war veterans. And then new feedback kind of led me to drop the comparative aspect of my research. And then I, kept on focusing on Maghrebin political prison literature, which I later discovered was a huge mistake. Books like Tip of the Spear, The Internal Colony, Golden Gulag help you unravel the dialectics of this state-imposed amnesia, let me say. They help you understand Black struggle and Black radicalism and link weaponized resistance to captivity. Now, I would like to begin with one of the book's foundational claims that Black people are doubly a captive nation. This reminds me of our discussion, John, if you remember. In Internal Colony, we had this kind of discussion of a nation within a nation and how Black people created this metaphor of the internal colony. And then this is reiterated in Ori's book. And I love how these connections resonate between the webinars in this series. Captive nation here is not used as a metaphor, but it's used to refer to a political condition, in fact. And from this description, Burton writes that the physically imprisoned had therefore been doubly captured, doubly so. So within an already colonized situation, the incarceration status doubly colonizes the Black people. And in this sense, we understand that prison does not initiate captivity for Black people because it's already happening. But it does intensify it to lead a fight against and from within the carceral world, then is to confront a larger system of captivity that goes beyond prison walls. So from here, Tip of the Spear offers what Burton explicitly calls a new vision of carcerality. Central to this vision is political Blackness as a mode of consciousness, as a way of understanding Black struggle, not as reformism, but as an insurgent political practice in warlike conditions. And this discussion about prisons as warlike sites was very inspiring for me. This is something that made me realize that we don't have that in Maghrebin political prison literature. The struggle does not evolve into a rebellion. I mean, the most resistance acts, the most telling resistance act that you might notice in other Maghrebin narratives I examined would be the hunger strike, but not to initiate a rebellion like the ones that are discussed and examined in this book. So from here, this way of understanding Black struggle dismantles the roots of Black revolutionary thinking from inside the carceral world, while establishing also very strong connections with antebellum America. And Burton reminds us that antebellum plantocracies lived in constant fear of rebellion, and the latter being understood as a renewal of war, renewal of costs that wars might entail. And in this framework, to rebel is to inaugurate, and I'm quoting Ori here, to rebel is to inaugurate new movements toward freedom. And this necessitates mob control strategies. In the case of the US, it was interesting for me to read that prison-crats actually thought that the solution to this was to build more prisons and to engage in more rigid mob management and mob control strategies and manuals. And from here, Burton reframes political incarceration itself because he shows us that it means removing people from circulation, whether outside from the circulation from society, and also there's another double isolation inside the jail because political prisoners are always isolated from the common law prisoners, and this removal produces a new danger, the danger or the risk of carceral rebellion. Attica made this risk very visible. Burton is also clear on the origins of the struggle and the needs that were expressed by Black activists and Black um, radicalism, access to decent food, clothing, shelter, medical care, also other demands related to the incarceration condition, like visitation privileges, like decent bail, normal bail amounts, humane parole policies, and so on. This is meaningful to the detainee. It explains why the struggle is happening. People want to improve carceral conditions and also outside community conditions. However, Burton shows us that this is, despite the fact that it's necessary, it's not the horizon of Black radical struggle. And here I would very much be interested in hearing what Ori has to say about the shift from original struggle for better conditions to a larger cause with historiographical intentions, as he shows us throughout this book. Attica and other under-researched rebellions, such as Auburn, are not read as riots or as tragedies or as humanitarian crisis, but as part of a longer history of rebellion, a continuum, shaped by counterinsurgency and by colonial repressive strategies. I also like the way the book sheds light on the idea that prisons were designated for men, but the situation of captivity, dehumanizes men and strips them from their manhood. Rebellion thus shows us that it is the ultimate humanizing and indeed masculinizing process. Crucially, the analysis does not romanticize the process, of course, but it examines the complex ways that prisoners claim manhood through rebellion, so how manhood is constructed through the act of revolt. This book is methodologically framed as a counterinsurgent historiography, and everybody, from Tunisia here knows, God, how I love historiography and everything that touches on historiography. And thanks to the variety of primary sources that Ori mentions in this book, the qualitative study that shaped it, it proves that, as Ori says, listening to movement elders matters. And also in this book, figures such as George Jackson, who described Black people as historical prisoners of war, are treated not as rhetorical voices, but Jackson is treated as a theorist of captivity, theorist of rebellion. And echoes of this will be found in many of Angela Davis' writings, which I had the pleasure and the honor of examining also. Burton shows us that the Attica revolt resulted, as I said earlier, in new strategies of mob control, cooperation also with the media to modify the public's perception of riots, vilifying Black insurgents, and so on. These were not accidental responses, of course. They were calculated counterinsurgent techniques, used by the state. Which also resorts to a historical amnesia by trying to dissimulate and hide whatever the prison can tell us. And it is through the writings of political prisoners and through research such as this one that we can hear about what used to happen behind the walls of these prisons. And despite the physical incapacitation, captives explored many ways of exercising power and also reverting the power dynamics, because they are isolated. This means that the authorities are afraid of them. So the state responds with preventive detention, which is sending these people away to jail because they want to prevent what they can cause within society. A strategy, the state deploys broadly against populations that are deemed surplus. And, this is, at the core of Black thinking, that the state does not think, this particular population is needed outside, and therefore it is isolated inside in a targeted fashion against Black revolutionaries. And, the Panther history is replete with such examples. Finally, Burton warns us against fetishizing portrayals of Black victimization, because this obscures the internal debates. And these narratives depoliticize rebellion and erase counterinsurgency. And this is why Tip of the Spear is so important in my view. Burton insists that without this critical aspect of counterinsurgency theory and practice, weaponized reforms will continue to thwart the development of revolutionary and abolitionist projects. And the book forces us to see prison uprisings not as an exception, but as part of a long war, and to recognize that the spear has been sharpened on both sides. Thank you, Ori, for writing this book, and thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Wow. Okay, great. So, thank you, Yosra. As everyone here, I'm sure will agree with me, when Yosra said, I don't want to just co-host, I want to be in the conversation, my first response was, that's an excellent idea, and now you can see why. So, just really, really great to have those comments. Charisse, let's go over to you if we can now.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me on the panel, John. And I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I'm actually going to talk about two other books to kind of triangulate Ori's book, because I'm going to talk about epistemology today. So, because there's just too much to say about Tip of the Spear, I think that it was the most important book that came out in 2023. And my book came out in 2023, so that's saying a lot. I think it's a great book, but I think that Ori's book is it is so incredibly relevant to our current moment. It is, and it matters in and beyond academia. And so I'm currently writing about epistemology. And in fact, I taught about it in my Black Social and Political Thought class this week. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about at the moment. And Ori's book is very relevant to this topic. And so I know our organizer and activists and non-academic friends are probably rolling their eyes, but I promise this is not just an abstract discussion or an academic focus. It is actually important, especially in a world structured in and through imperialist propaganda that aims to confuse, obfuscate, distort, erase, and mollify. So epistemology is foundational to the battle of ideas. So what is epistemology? I'll just briefly say it's the study of knowledge formation. It is a study of what it is to know anything, what we actually know, and how we come to know that, how we justify beliefs, how we come to understand and believe, and then ascribe meaning to phenomena. It's concerned with the creation and dissemination of knowledge and the sources of knowledge, as well as how knowledge is constituted. And it is central to determining what and who constitutes valid knowledge about phenomena in general, but Black people and Black communities in particular in this context. And then Ori's book offers what Charles Mills, the late philosopher, calls an alternative epistemology, whereby those in subordinated groups who have access to zones beyond the universal offer a critical reinterpretation of the social system. It's brought about by structural oppression and the refusal of the pseudo-universal positions that maintain structures of domination. I'm sorry if you hear my daughter in the background. Mind your business. I'm just kidding. All right. So the two works that I want to bring forward are this book here by Josh Myers of Black Study, and then a really recent work by Adebayo Oluwawomi, which is Foundations of Black Epistemology. And so Josh writes that Black Study is revolt against social valuation systems of the bourgeois West, that Black Study is a form of conceptual and epistemological freedom. He says it is, quote, our ability to be with and for each other, as well as it means, quote, that tradition of refusal of the knowledge of the world as it was given to us by those committed to the colonial and racial order, and all the ways we still experience it, the many othering practices it generated. It is refusal of the blessings of liberal humanism and its variants, the philosophy of life and living that is really only about the political same, a violent reanimation of the status quo, the Western conception of what has and always should be. It is in refusing that we create Black Study. There is indeed an alternative and a tradition of study that rests upon the translation and recovery of different ways of knowing. This is our mission, and it is also that of Black Study, end quote. And so I would say that, you know, Tip of the Spear is a quintessential enunciation of that project of Black Study. In terms of Black epistemology, Bio explains that it deals with the power of knowledge aimed at self-transformation through the understanding and application of personal epistemologies. And it's about the knowledge of power aimed at the transformation of sociopolitical conditions and realities. He writes, quote, it engages with the question of who can acquire knowledge, perspectives of truth, and the categorization of epistemic authority in regard to the articulations of the goals of knowledge acquisition. It underscores the importance of considering questions of belief formation from the Black perspective, especially within a discourse community that has for too long erased this perspective. It is an approach to epistemological inquiry that takes the Black subject seriously as an epistemological agent capable of engaging in sophisticated deliberations about topics such as the formation of belief, emanating truth, and contesting the ideas about whose truth deserves to be granted validation, as well as who gives such validation to knowledge. Tip of the spear inhabits the form of Black study, Myers outlines in his text. Of Black study provides a lens through which to read and understand the insurgent Black study of the Long Attica Revolt and the revolutionary humanism therein. Both projects interrogate the human, or what it means to be human beyond man's overrepresentation of the human, through the words and praxis of radical Black knowledge producers. In reading the text together, no differentiation needs to be assumed between guerrilla intellectuals pushing back against disciplinarity in academia and those in physical and ideological struggle against war-making systems and institutions of incarceration. Tip of the Spear is also a work of Black epistemology insofar as it takes seriously the ideas, theories, and analyses of radical Black people, particularly radical Black captives, subjected to carcerality, war, counterinsurgency, and manifold forms of terroristic state violence. The text prioritizes whose knowledge is ordinarily rendered irrelevant through elitism, careerism, performances of respectability, liberalism, anti-radicalism, racism, and so on. In this way, Tip of the Spear is a form of epistemic disloyalty. This is evident in Ori's emphatic statement that, quote, readers will notice my obdurate refusal to normalize reformist vernaculars. This is a rhetorical strategy of counter-war that strives to destabilize the epistemic dominance of the state, end quote. And so with the rest of my time, I'll just briefly remark on what I find to be 5 important kind of epistemological interventions or insurgencies of the text that make us have to fundamentally rethink the terms of knowledge. So one is war as a constant state of US society. This is a fundamental epistemological insurgency. We have to understand that we are at war. I am so sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to go grab my baby. Hold on.
And while you're doing that, Charisse, I'll just say, as someone's noted in the chat, like, we love intergenerational gatherings. That's absolutely right. This is like more than okay. And Charisse, also, if you want to continue talking with your camera on or off, whatever you're more comfortable with, yeah, I'll leave it to you.
It's okay. She wanted to stay put. She just demanded me to address her. Okay. Sorry about that. So war as a constant state of US society. This is fundamentally important because in understanding the constant state of war and war making, we must contend with imperialism, colonialism, and the ways that we constitute the forms of state violence that I'll get to in a second. It is important to note, of course, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, that those who are incarcerated are double captives insofar as US society as a whole is sort of renders oppressed and exploited people prisoners of war in the context of the settler colony. So that's, I think, an important epistemological intervention. It makes us fundamentally rethink the United States as a democracy, a liberal democracy, as arbiters of equality, as the world's sort of moral police. I think many of us understand that's not to be true, but then understanding it as a war-making apparatus adds, not only talks about what it's not, but what it actually is. Secondly is violence, the violence of the oppressed as counter-violence and as an invaluable tool of rebellion alongside others. And so understanding that the actions in which we engage as counter-violence, again, reveals that this state is fundamentally constituted, is fundamentally inscribed in savage insurgency against anybody who can be deemed disposable or on the constitutive outside. And so again, that rethinking not only legitimates, but necessitates counter-violence. And we are in a moment whereby those of us who consider ourselves to be activists and organizers can undermine our own tools, right? We deem which tools are acceptable, how we should show up to protests and gatherings. And oftentimes what is illegitimized is so-called violence, whether it's violence against people or violence against property. But if we understand this violence as counter violence, perhaps that gives us the opportunity to rethink or to embrace all the tools in our toolkit when we're struggling against this juggernaut. Third is the underground as a metaphor. So Ori writes on page 96 that the underground is a geographical metaphor for a condition of militant refusal and exteriority to respectability, visibility, governability, and upward mobility under tactical capitalism and colonial war. And he goes on to say that any real struggle for liberation requires some apparatus for criminalized activities. And it's really important that he does not say criminal activity. These are criminalized activities. If we believe our own analysis that the colonizers, the ruling class plunders us, then we're just taking our shit back, right? It's not, so what is called crime? There's a difference between calling something crime and something criminalized. I think that's important. But this idea of underground also challenges the fact that, again, all of the recording, all of the visibility that we think this project of liberation and solidarity requires. I think the underground as a legitimate and necessary political space challenges us to how we are navigating surveillance culture and also how much we are just giving to the state. They don't even have to do a whole lot of digging, to be honest. We just tell everything. And so this idea of the underground as not unlike violence, as a legitimate and necessary part of an overall project of liberation. Again, and to me, it's not just a political consideration. This is epistemological consideration. It has a fundamentally rethink what is politics, what is struggle, how do we struggle, who counts as legitimate revolutionary subjects. And fourth is the discussion of sexual revenge and gender war that Ori lays out on pages 120 to 126. And especially thinking about how he says, quote, this brutalization sought to actively produce new gender and racial formations. And so I think the first aspect of this is oftentimes when we're talking about gender, we're talking about non-men. Or when we talk about gendered violence, we're talking about sexual violence against non-men, as if sexual violence is only the purview of, or male presenting or male-bodied people are exempted from this form of violence, sexual violence. We know this isn't true. And I think that we have to take that seriously to really understand the totalizing effects of colonial violence. Moreover, I think this point about the creation of new gender and racial formations through acts of brutality, captivity, carcerality, and war also helps us challenge the binary in ways that perhaps current or traditional kind of trans activism or kind of trans discourse doesn't get at directly. Right. So not to replace that discourse, but to give another angle to think about the ways that genders are constantly being made, remade, and refashioned, especially when we think about violence. And then finally, is this idea of the structuring contradiction, which is on page 152. And that is the tension between the urgent need to secure reforms to enable the captives' immediate survival as human beings and the equally urgent project of abolishing broader systems of oppression. And this is a central contradiction of the prison movement and the broader Black liberation struggle, end quote. This is fundamentally important. And, this is how we get terms like non-reformist reforms or whatever, but this is perhaps an irresolvable contradiction. The ways that reforms are fundamentally necessary for people to even be able to fight, but how those reforms are always already a negotiation of the terms of our immiseration. And oftentimes can waylay a more direct confrontation with the state. And so that is fundamentally important. Again, that is epistemological as well as a political question. How do we navigate or resolve that contradiction? Especially because Ori lays out kind of four forms of counterinsurgency that constitute that contradiction. He talks about expansion, humanization, diversification, and programification, and these are really normalized as progressive. And we have to contend with because if you think about that, is literally what DEI is. And all of a sudden, we're fighting for DEI because, on the one hand, DEI has become the shorthand for racialized people gaining any modicum of recognition or humanity. On the other hand, we understand this as a project of liberal capture. But nonetheless, but it's not just DEI. These approaches of expansion, humanization, diversification, and programification are embedded in all of our institutions and must be contended with for the forms of counterinsurgency that they ultimately are, even as they allow some modicum of relief. And so, to me, those are just, there are many other aspects of the book that make that present epistemological questions. Perhaps Ori can talk about more. I don't really think about questions. I'm just kind of talking about the book. I know and also for these things, it's like we're supposed to be critical or whatever. I don't have any notes. I think it's a wonderful book, not because I agree with every single thing, but because we are too rehearsed in critique and not nearly rehearsed enough in collective study and taking what is there and what is useful and necessary and works. And so that is the approach that I'm taking today. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, right. I'm supposed to be hosting here, but I'm so busy taking notes because there's so many good things in there. Collective study versus critique. What a place to end. Thank you, Charisse. Thank you so much. Matef, let's turn it over to you.
Wow, wow, wow. I can barely talk. After those three interventions, I'm just lost. And I got so many questions, but I'll make some reactions. But first of all, big gratitude and thanks to all the organizers putting this together. This is amazing and mind-boggling already. I mean, the book was so expansive already. But when I first read your book, Brother Ori, I had the same feeling I got when I read Sundiata Kohli's A Brief History of the New African Prison Struggle. You go through class, race, gender, technology, geography, like Sister Ruthie Gilmore and Golden Gulag, but not only the physical geography of this settler colony, but the geography of melanated bodies and the geography of mind in conflict with the settler and the oppressed. So what are the borders in question in each of these terrains? Not only the intersection of race, class, and gender, but the crashing together of the material and immaterial battlegrounds of physical struggle, of narration, as others have said, as in who gets to tell this story? How do we make meaning out of these archived memories? What tools and weapons shall we employ to make sure our story is accepted, remembered, digested, and acted upon? Which reminded me of Greg Carr's Africana Studies framework. How do we see ourselves versus how they see us? How do we make memory and meaning of past and present? What tools do we use for that? And that led me to Angie Porter's dichotomy at the site of slavery between European laws and African protocols that simply do not get along to the point of war. You've raised our discussion about simply ending slavery by exposing prisons to be war. The 13th Amendment and court cases supporting slavery don't tell the whole tale of what is happening on both sides of the borders of our engagement. Declarations of war are where we must comprehend what is happening, whether it's the 1660s BCE, the 1860s CE, or the 1960s, what it BE. The creation of USA and the supporting documents that form this criminal enterprise are the declaration of war against us others. I love the way you bring that others to the discussion. You also made me think of the Asajafo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where he divides the world into three arenas: liberated zones, contested zones, and enemy-held territory. What's important for our discussion is Dr. Nkrumah's directions for revolutionaries living in each one of these zones. For those of us like you and me in enemy-held territory, Dr. Nkrumah has only two directives. One, make sure everyone around you knows that this is an enemy-controlled zone. Two, support revolutionaries fighting to hold liberated zones and to take over contested zones. That's it. Those are our two responsibilities. And that is why your book is so important. Tip of the Spear clarifies exactly where we are, that we are at war, and gives succor, is that succor, to our side while exposing our enemy to the light of day, something very detrimental to their tactics of hijacking narratives so they can hide in plain sight. Or maybe, as Dylan Rodriguez begs us to please help him come up with a pedagogy that celebrates the death of our oppressors. Tip of the Spear is not a reformist tome. This is revolution in black and white. That's ink and paper. Tip of the Spear and the Long Attica Revolt are part of the revolutionary struggle for decolonization at the locus of the U.S. prison industrial complex. And that's all the reactions I wrote down, but I got a ton of questions. And the first one I got to ask, because my former students begged for this. They'll be upset if I don't. So, what role, thank you, Charisse, for this, do reformist victories have in revolutionary organizing, or are all attempts at reform moot because we are at war? Question, why has counterinsurgency outside of the US, Philippines, Vietnam, Central America, etc., been done openly while so heavily concealed and covert inside the US? Question. Historically, we stopped fascism by forming a united front within our working class that forced the ruling class to condescend and reform capitalism in order to preserve their ruling class power and status. So what do we do today? Are we going to have to end capitalism, repeat the past? What are your thoughts on that? And please, I'm thinking about class collaboration here. Question. Besides the creation of a new genre of human being, what other creations or simply just what other lessons can we learn from today's organizing struggles? Here I'm kind of riffing on Alexandra Kollontai, where she insists to the revolutionaries that all relationships must change for us to be revolutionary. Question, how can the epistemology of the epistolary, meaning making through letter writing, be so important when, at least here in California, the overwhelming majority of prisoners cannot read nor write? I know you touched on that in your book, but could you lean into that a little bit more for us, please? Question. The rapper Reddy Z says that genocide ain't nothing but suicide on auto drive. Both Kalamu Yasalam and George Lipsitz have said that the latter stages of genocide look self-inflicted. So I think Gerald Horne said that too. So please help us understand how we are complicit in our own destruction and how we can combat such. Question, how is the pacification of indigenous peoples in North America, Turtle Island, tied to the pacification inside prisons? How does that mesh? And last question for now. Decades ago, Tony Samara, who did critical research on the export of US-style prisons, told me that if I'm not reading the journal Prison Legal News, I won't understand incarceration today. So please tell us what else we can or should be reading to understand the prison industrial complex right now. Plus, what are you reading these days? Or do you have any other books on any subject that will expand our minds the exact way that Tip of the Spear does? Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Matef. Wow. Again, Ori, you write a profound book, you get profound responses and questions. So I will turn it over to you to address these in whatever way you like. Yeah.
That was incredible. I'm really overwhelmed with gratitude. I did not prepare any comments. I should have because uh, I feel like I need some time to just kind of like let all of that wash over me. Um, I guess the first thing I'll say um, is that I felt a profound sense of gratitude and um, privilege to be able to write the book and to have infrastructure around me that enabled me to give it the level of attention that it required. In the sense that I got to have a tenure track job, I got some fellowships where I didn't have to teach. Like I have a house and an office and all of those things, and um, yeah, every moment of working on it felt like, although it was difficult, it felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I'm sure many of you who have read the book saw that it starts off with a mentor of mine named Eddie Ellis, who essentially, gave me an assignment. I did a long interview with him, and he, in a nice way, basically said, like, you're asking me stupid questions. Like, these are questions that I've already answered. Like, like the way that you're framing the questions is already captured by a sort of narrative strategy that's been laid out prior to you. What if you really want to do something helpful, you need to find a way out of that paradigm that you're in, which was essentially a reformist paradigm, and excavate the knowledge that we had already developed through struggle. And years later, after the book was actually finished, and I would have included it if I had found it in time, but I found a recording of a speech he gave the day after he was released from prison in 1992. He went to this is Eddie Ellis, former member of the New York Black Panther Party, earlier formation of the Black Panthers. He went to, I believe it was the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, not to speak, but just to pay gratitude to all of the people who supported him and helped him get out. But actually, he was pulled on stage. He was spotted on stage by Dhoruba bin Wahad, who was another political prisoner in New York, pulled on stage and was asked to give an impromptu speech. And in that impromptu speech, he recounted an analysis that he learned from his name escapes me, Guyanese Black nationalist intellectual who was a part of the Revolutionary Action Movement. His name will come to me. But he essentially said that, look, ever since the slave ships arrived on the shores of West Africa, we've been at war, and that war has been ongoing ever since. And the prisons all around this country are just a manifestation of that war. And that's how he started his speech. And so, just as Dr. Burden-Stelly mentions, it was very much an epistemological intervention into, look, we need to be thinking in a different way about what it is that we're up against, and inviting us to really grapple with all of the implications of what that might mean. And of course, once I realized that it took me a while in the writing of the book to realize that what I was studying was war. But once I actually came to terms with that and began to study war in a much more deeper way, that's when all of the sort of methodological interventions began to crystallize. Because as soon as you start to study war, you realize you have to study propaganda. Like in one of perhaps the oldest book on war, Sun Tzu says that all warfare is based on deception. So then how do you write a book about events that actually happened in the material world under conditions that are structured by deception? And so that sort of became the question that gave rise to different strategies around archival war, or how I privilege certain voices over others. So I kind of just wanted to start with that and to convey my gratitude to all of the people who supported me in the writing of the project. Everything in the book is what I've learned, and I wrote it essentially for myself. I wrote it in a way that hopefully would guide people through the sort of many of the insights that had been generated by people who had been struggling at the tip of the spear over previous cycles of struggle. And so I'm really gratified that folks found it useful. Regarding this idea of, internal colonialism and the prison as an intensification of the generalized conditions of captivity that Black and other colonized people experience in the broader world. One of the insights that many people from this period highlighted was that in some ways, thinking about the prison as a paradigm for the broader world helps illuminate many of the contradictions that we face on the outside. And so thinking and looking at the prison then becomes a methodological paradigm to help us understand how power operates more broadly. The flip side of this, of course, is that the state also learns this too. I mean, that's part of what the book is about. The state learns from these insurgencies, right? So the FBI program that I talk about, PRISAC, the Prison Activist Surveillance Program, is a continuation of COINTELPRO. And in those documents, they say things that look like they could have been written in the Black Panther Party newspaper. For instance, they say that, the Bureau is well aware that the boundary of, what do they say? They say the Bureau is well aware that, the activism of these Black militants doesn't stop at prison walls, right? That you can't draw a strong demarcation between the inside and outside of prisons. Therefore, we have to be moving in and out, right? This is basically a reversal and a weaponization of an insight that the movement had been promulgating in order to sort of develop their organizing across prison walls. But one of the things I think that has helped shape the reception of the book, tragically, is the fact that it was released in October of 2023. So it was released simultaneously to Al-Aqsa flood. And people were reading the book as the intensification of the genocide against Palestinians in Gaza was unfolding. And that shaped how they understood what was happening in Palestine and shaped how they understood Attica. And that sort of helps prove the point of the book, right? That prisons are a paradigm because of course, Gaza is an open air prison that before this moment of genocide unfolded was populated by 2.3 million people, which is roughly the entire population of the prison population in the United States. So when you think about this massive prison rebellion, right, against a prison that was believed to be riot-proof or impenetrable, right, speaking to the sort of imperial hubris, right, speaking to all of the fissures and fractures in the regime of domination that is projected to us to be invincible, but which actually is stricken with flaws from top to bottom and inconsistencies that can be exploited. You think about the intense use of hasbara or propaganda, right? The overlaps in the use of atrocity propaganda, sexual propaganda, right? So this idea, this spurious idea that the Attica rebels castrated people and sexually violated people, when in fact it was the captors that were doing that, right? And we saw the same thing unfold on a much larger scale, right? We think about, the Hannibal Doctrine, right? Which basically gave Israeli authorities the green light to kill their own people, right? Because the imperative of eliminating any form of radical insurgency was of greater value than the lives of the people that they were supposedly trying to protect. So, the argument of the book, and then we can think about what's unfolding within the US empire, the sort of like diminishing, the diminishing relevance of these sort of more consensual methods of maintaining order, right? The decline in the use of sort of like ideology as a way to keep people in line, and the intensifying use of just naked violence as a way to keep people in line, right? A Gramscian analysis would suggest that both of those things are always in play. But the fact that the more consensual elements are becoming less and less relevant is an indication of an intensifying crisis of legitimacy and a realignment in how power is operating, and the revelation of this condition of ongoing war that's always been present, but which has been obscured by a veneer of liberalism, or which has been unequally distributed geographically. That's what we're seeing now. And so part of the argument that they were making in the 70s is that prisons are a zone of war. They also talked about prisons as a zone of fascism. And they said, look, everyone needs to be invested in abolishing this condition of war, because if not, it's going to metastasize and spread, which is, I mean, this is the sort of moment that we're in. And so in many ways, I think the sort of present moment has lent itself to the kind of receptivity to the arguments of the book, even if people may or may not agree with them. It's definitely a moment in which people are trying to rethink the very nature of this thing that we're encouraged to think of as a democracy, and think about, okay, well, what are some other ways of analyzing how power works? And of course, the book is arguing that the most effective and the most truthful, honest way to do that would be to think about, our political condition as one of a permanent war. So I'm just so grateful for the generosity of all of the readers, and honored to be in this conversation, and grateful for everyone that took the time to join. And I look forward to further engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ori. Thanks so much. And thanks again to the panelists. So, Oussema, I'll turn it over to you to moderate the next section where we open it up. And I'll say this too, just as I hand it over, that Yosra, Charisse, and Matef I'm sure there'll be some other people here in the Zoom room who are going to want to ask questions, interact, make comments. But that doesn't mean that your work is done. If there are places where you want to also be part of the conversation, you are very welcome and encouraged to do that as well. Or you may have other things you want to say back to Ori or to each other. The conversation can go in whatever direction it does. But let me turn it over to Oussema to take over from here.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing comments. Very thoughtful, very in-depth comments that deal with the complexity of the book, The Tip of the Spear. I was at awe with the intervention of Dr. Burton. I loved the comparison between the prison population in the United States and the genocide in Gaza, and the structural comparison between both. That is very illuminating. This is the time where the audience could ask questions. If you have any thoughts, any questions, anything you would like to share about the book's arguments, about the book's methodology, or simply relevant ideas or thoughts that you'd like to ask the author or any of our readers, please feel free to do that.
Can I realized that I didn't answer any of Brother Matef's questions. And I guess I just want to mention one, and because I think Charisse also.
You've just muted, Ori.
For some reason, I remuted myself. Maybe that was a subconscious thing. Anyway, Charisse also mentioned reform, and I know you said your students definitely wanted to hear an answer. I'm not making any kind of strict argument against reform. I mean, obviously, struggle is a process. You have to win reforms tactically. I just think one thing that we need to understand, and I think a lot of people just don't recognize, that first of all, the reason why the war paradigm is important is because if you don't think you're at war, then that means you think that you are up against some kind of system that is the result of sort of like accumulated inequalities that need to be tinkered with or transformed. But when you're at war, you realize that you have an enemy, that you have an opposition, and that opposition is also using strategy and tactics. So it forces you to think strategically and tactically, and that becomes really important. And so when you read sort of like the enemy's manuals, they talk at length about reform as a strategy for maintaining their own domination, right? How can we, like, so, you know, how can we appease the majority of the population by doling out some of the demands that we can give that don't in any way disrupt or endanger our hold on power? How can we dole out reforms that will shore up the legitimacy of our rule and also isolate the people who are making more militant and revolutionary demands and make them look like they're extremists or crazy for wanting more than what is reasonable, right? So that's an active strategy that is deployed. So I'm not making an argument against reforms. Reforms are necessary for the preservation of people's lives and well-being under these conditions of war and genocide. This is precisely the contradiction that Charisse was highlighting, and it is a structural contradiction. But I think it was, I can't remember who said it, that you are not successful unless your successors are successful. So one of the issues then is, you know, a reform in a particular moment, oftentimes those reforms respond to real urgent needs. But what happens over time when the state is able to co-opt that reform, twist it and turn it against the movement and use it in ways that were contrary to its initial design from a movement perspective? And how can movements maintain and create the institutional memory and longevity that will enable them to continue to ensure that a given reform is implemented in ways that are advantageous to the people that they represent? So it's an intergenerational and a more of a longer term struggle. So no, reforms are really important, but they're a terrain of struggle. And this is why war is important, because everything in war is both a tool and a weapon. It can be used for you or against you. And it's all about who has the power to enforce particular demands and to ensure that they're applied in ways that are advantageous. So I hope that answers somewhat the question.
Thank you so much for that. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand, or you could write it down in the comment section and I would make sure to read it. We have, I think, a question from Yosra. Yes, please.
Thank you, Oussema. Thank you, Ori. Thank you, Matef, for your wonderful intervention and the questions. I mean, I shared all the questions that you had in mind, especially about what should we be reading now if we're interested in prison studies, if Ori can answer that. But I also wanted to know, Ori, how was the reaction to your book? Not the one related to support, especially how people appreciated the relevance of the book with what was happening in Gaza, but how was this book received by people who wouldn't see it as, as a pro-system or pro-prison-crat book? Is there any reaction that is worth telling us about? Thank you.
So I'm sure there are quite a few academics who don't like the book. I haven't heard from them. So we'll see if that changes. But I tried to write it in a fashion that was extremely rigorous, so that if you wanted to challenge it in a fundamental way, that you'd have to work really hard. So maybe they're hard at work at that, maybe not. Um, Mostly it's been positive. I think the right people have made it clear that they don't like the book, which is the prison authorities. The book has been banned in prisons all around the country. It's banned in New York. There's a system-wide ban in California, and in California it's also been labeled contraband, such that if an incarcerated person is found with the book, they can be punished. Florida and lots of other states. Now, again, to the point, to some of the larger points of the book, I got a whole bunch of letters from people in California who are still reading the book and feel comfortable enough writing letters about the fact that they've read the book, right? So people are still reading it, right? So this idea that you can incarcerate knowledge is a flawed concept. And the idea that my book is somehow advocating violence or will incite incarcerated people to violence, when everything that's in the book is what I learned from people who were coming out of prison, who were telling me it's war. And they didn't just make up the idea that it's war. They learned the fact that it's war from the prison authorities who were waging war on them. So the idea that my book is somehow special or dangerous is laughable. But also it's important not to take the prison authorities too seriously, because they ban all kind of stuff for no reason, right? Like they banned Plato's book because it had politics in the title, right? So we can't give them too much credit. But it's clear that some of them read it very closely and understand the implications of it and take it seriously. So that's probably the biggest response. And then I've gotten a couple of weird emails from state and state adjacent institutions inviting me to come and talk to them about whatever, and I just ignore those, but I do save them for my records.
Thank you so much, Ori, for these for your answers. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any in the comment section.
I can say something about what we should be reading, but it's probably disappointing because it's nothing new. It's like I didn't cite a whole lot of new stuff in the book. You know what I mean? Like most of what I read is old archival stuff that I found most useful. And I would have cited new stuff if I found it helpful in a profound way. I'm not trying to throw shade. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being honest. Like, I think, you know, part of what I was trying to do in Tip of the Spear is to say something that Fanon hadn't already said, right? And I think I actually failed at that, right? I think I said a lot of new stuff at an archival level, at a historical level. People learned new things about what happened, but like theoretically, I don't think I said anything that hasn't already been said, right? So I would invite people to read, you know, a lot of the classic works of revolutionary theory, Black and otherwise, around the world, third world Marxism, all of it, right? And to think in a deep way about, you know, about that work. So that's my recommendation.
On that point, I have a quick question, if you may. I mean, you talk about an archival war, right, in writing the book, and so I was wondering, how did you decide when to trust or when to confront or when to even maybe refuse to use state sources for that matter, or sources from incarcerated individuals? What guided you through that process?
Yeah, you know, so it's a good question. So the first thing is like part of what I did was try to put these sources in tension with each other. So there are a few points in the book where I say, you know, I'm actually not trying to synthesize or triangulate a truth in relation to these two disparate accounts, the account coming from the Black Radical Archive and the account coming from the Carceral Archive. And, I'm the scholar who's going to, synthesize them and find the truth. Like, that's actually not what I'm doing. The profound antagonism within the source material is itself evidence that war is unfolding. I mean, that is a product, that is an effect of war, right? I mean, that's why when, if you look at oral histories from soldiers or people who've been through war, they say things like, I don't know what happened. I don't know I don't know what we were doing. It's a profound confusion. And so that itself is a data point. In terms of how to trust the state archive, I think there's always truth in the state archive. It's just not always the truth that they think it is, right? It's like the way that I read the archive around, the lie they told that the prisoners were inflicting sexual violence against the guard. And I actually use that as actual evidence of a truth, but it's a truth about them and how they see the world. It's not a truth about what actually happened. So keeping in mind two things. One, these people lie constantly. State actors lie constantly. That's not to say that, revolutionaries always tell the truth. They don't. They can't always tell the truth. So that's a whole other thing. But the state actors lie constantly. Two, even when they tell the truth, even when they think they're telling the truth that is refracted through a white supremacist and imperialist epistemology. So sometimes we have to look at the truth that they're telling as, again, a reflection of them and their own positionality and the way that they see the world. And then sometimes there's great overlap between the different kinds of sources. And in those instances, you can sort of act accordingly. I think that's all I can say right now. But yeah, that's the general approach. And I think I call it archival disloyalty. You have to approach the state archive from a disloyal perspective. And the dominant trend in sort of the historiography of social movements is to treat the state archive as the standard narrative shaping device, and then perhaps to color or add flavor to your narrative by pulling in quotes from people in the movement or whatever, but the spine of the narrative is established by the state. And I did precisely the opposite. The spine of the narrative was shaped not simply by incarcerated people as a general category, but by a specific subset of incarcerated people, those who understood themselves and were understood by the state to be revolutionaries. And so it's not a perfect story. It's not a total story. It's a story from a particular perspective. But I think that because these people were viewed as so threatening, it's a perspective that if you look at the development of incarceration through this lens, a lot about why prisons function the way they do will be illuminated.
I mean, thank you so much for these insights. I mean, I think this is very interesting and very useful for individuals who are planning to conduct archival research. We do have in Tunisia, in humanities disciplines, students, PhD and MA researchers who are doing research on oppressed peoples, who are doing research on Native Americans, who are doing research on different oppressed categories in the United States, and their research might require examining certain archives, whether online or otherwise. And I do believe this process of critical reflection, of questioning the archives themselves, this entire paradigm of the archival war, I think it's very useful for them to take into consideration. I don't know if anyone else has any questions, maybe John or Matef. I believe, Matef, you had many questions earlier. If there's one that you'd like to ask again, maybe for the author to answer, or John, if you have any comments you'd like to share.
Sure, if I can add something. Ori, it's a question for you, but really, Matef, Charisse, and Yosra might have some thoughts on this too. And it's just about the contemporary moment. And it's about how, reading your book helps me understand what I'm looking at in the news at the moment, right? And in particular, that this is that obviously the actions of the Trump administration are not a departure, right? We can see many different continuities of many sorts with the help of your book and thinking about also about your book as a book of political theory and then a book that is also an intellectual history of the ideas that you chart and put before us as well. On both sides, this is what is something. It's so rare to read a book where kind of the sort of from above and from below to speak crudely, but how those are both theorized in ways that on both sides really cause us to kind of reconceptualize. In my case, anyways, definitely things I thought I knew. But here's my question. So if there's ways the tip of the spear might help us to see that things we're seeing in the news, ICE, for example, things we're seeing in the news right now are not radical departures, but are best understood in longer histories. But also maybe how can tip of the spear actually also help us understand what is new about this moment? Or to the degree to which you even agree with that. Maybe the answer is there's nothing new. I'm not sure, but I'm interested in what anyone in the conversation might think about just the basic historian's question, really, continuity and Trump, continuity and change, and using tip of the spear to help us think through that kind of classic question in this moment.
I mean, one of the things that I ended the book with was saying, and I know this isn't what you're asking, but there was another question around, what do we do today? What should we be doing today? Or, the what is to be done question. And I ended the book, and I know this isn't what you're asking, but I ended the book by saying, that, or maybe it was in the intro, that you know, readers who are looking for, prescriptions will be disappointed because those aren't, and at the end of the book, I invite people to form reading groups and decide how this book can inform the current work that they're doing. In other words, you know, I assembled this book and wrote it based on the information and the research that I was doing, but that doesn't necessarily, but and I am involved in organizations, but not in a deep way, not in a way that is as serious as it should be. But my understanding of how politics operates is that's actually how you best and most effectively diagnose what is unfolding in real time. Like I had the benefit of being able to write about something that happened 50 years ago after at a moment when people who were involved had reached the age where they were willing to actually talk about these things in ways that they hadn't felt comfortable doing that before for a whole number of reasons, right? I think developing a rigorous analysis of what is unfolding now has to come from a totally different process, and it needs to be rooted in um, political organization and community. And people need to be able to analyze conditions based on where they are and what they're seeing at a local level. And I do think that we're living right now through a really profound structural realignment at a global level. And I think there are lots of moments to intervene. But I always hesitate to give these sort of broader pronouncements about what is unfolding. I mean, what I said earlier definitely applies in terms of the extent of the crisis globally being evident in the decline of the sort of consensual mechanisms of maintaining domination. So I think that is one thing that is new. I think also, and I said this already as well, the scope of conflict is expanding, right? So part of what the imprisoned revolutionaries were saying is that prisons are a zone of war, prisons are a zone of fascism, and that zone is expanding. And that is what is happening. So that is, I think, the thing that is new is that more and more people now are being ensnared in this very increasingly concentrated battle space that we see intensifying every day. So those would be the two broader things. But I think any kind of political analysis of this moment and the areas from intervention need to happen collectively by people who are rooted and grounded in political organization.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. I'll ask if, I mean, I'm also interested if Yosra and Matef have thoughts on this too, but and this follows up Yosra's question a little bit about just kind of like the reception of the book. Have you got a more direct sense that like about reading groups and people who are taking this up in exactly the spirit that you had hoped and I mean, obviously you've heard some of this you mentioned from incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated people, but also even more broadly, because the thing about this book too is some people might think, well, this book is about prisons, but I work on something else that might be kind of in solidarity, but isn't about the prison per se. But actually, one of the things about this book is that it is so instructive in thinking about all kinds of different sort of areas of struggle, right? So I'm curious if you've had any kind of reception from people. It's also interesting because people might form reading groups, so they might not like contact the author, right? You don't obviously you're not going to fully know. But have you heard anything about kind of things that are people are doing in terms of maybe say a little bit more about that if you could about how the book is being received in terms of people reading it maybe collectively to come back to that collective study idea that Charisse emphasized for us.
Thank you. Yeah, next week I'm doing a read-in with Youth Justice, which is an organization based in New York. I've been overwhelmed and extremely gratified um, by the amount of activity that I've seen, either because people have invited me to come speak to their reading group or just seeing it on social media and things of that nature. But there's been quite a bit of that. And most importantly, the people who were in the book, before the book came out, I sent chapters I sent the chapters in which people appear to the people who were in the book so that they could read it first and let me know if they had any problems with it, including members of some of the groups, which it's not like I critique them, but I put their work in a light that is, uh, like some of the reform stuff. I think the approach that I took was different from what they expected. Um, but I wanted everyone to read it, and the people who were in the book read the book, and they gave me their blessing to put the book out, and so that was the peer review. That was the only peer review, the only reviews that I needed, and it was what was most important to me. Um, and some of the a lot of the surviving Attica brothers have read the book and expressed their appreciation, and so that to me is, yeah, that's the best that I could hope for. But yeah, there've been quite a few reading groups, and it's been amazing to see that, and it's an honor to it's just an honor. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, tremendous. And this book, I mean, again, obviously for those participants who you spoke to give their approval, like what could matter more, right? But also to think about the ways in it's been taken up by all of these other groups and may more of that take place. And hopefully this space here is an example of that as well. So Oussema, you said you had some other questions. If you want to maybe ask one, or we can wrap this up pretty soon. But if other people in the audience, if there's anything else that people want to take up, but Oussema, you might have. Oh, Diane's got a question. I'll step back here. I'm not even supposed to be moderating right now.
Yes, Diane, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much to Ori, if I may, the brilliance of your book, to the brilliance of this conversation. It is wonderful. And to the organizers for putting this together, really appreciate it so much. And um, Ori, I really love the way that your book is making this theoretical intervention, right? Reshaping epistemological frameworks. That's so crucial, as Charisse and others have been saying. But I also really appreciate the ways that you make really explicit the archives that you're working in, the ways you're working with archives, the interpretations that come from it. I'm teaching a archival research class right now, and I'm also trying to start a project on an archival project, Asian American Activism Archival Project. And I feel there's so much urgency at this moment to make sure that we preserve or find or locate and make accessible the archives of the 60s and 70s activists. And I'm also very invested in the more radical aspects of that movement, right, of our movements. And so I'm happy to see that like the Attica Brothers Foundation, right, is started so folks can archive their own materials. We have Freedom Archives, and I know Claude is on this Zoom. Just wondering if you or others have thoughts. I feel like so much more is happening in this moment, right? Technology allows us to digitize things in ways we couldn't before. And I'm learning a lot. I'm working with the Cedric and Elizabeth Robinson Archive at UCSB. But I'm wondering if you have thoughts, suggestions for the ways that we can deepen and accelerate this kind of work, the ways that we can share knowledge. My colleague here at UCSB, Juan Cobo Betancourt, does archival work in Colombia and elsewhere, and has actually DIY built his own scanners and can scan 1,200 pages an hour. It's incredible. It's like, how do we share this knowledge? How do we support this work that's happening by the activists who actually made this history, and by partnerships with scholars and activists and organizers? Anyways, how do we build this?
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work. You know, like that book it represents the best I can do in terms of my work. Like I'm happy with it. But one of the things that I regret, that's too strong a word. If I had more time, what I would have added was to talk about Yuri in the book. You know, I mentioned her in the acknowledgments, and there were other drafts where she comes up, but yeah, she's just not in the body of the text. And because of the structure of the way I did the book, 3 chapters, there just I wasn't able to find a place to put her. But she's just so important. Like the book wouldn't exist without people like Yuri, who was essentially, you know, I talk about archival war, like she was an archivist of the movement in such a profound way. And so, you know, I'm working on some stuff that tries to rectify that, specifically as it relates to Yuri. I'm working with the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Project. I know you know Akemi Kochiyama. So we're trying to figure out how to use Yuri's just amazing collection to do political education work, specifically with like people who are coming out of prison, and so we're working on that. And I'm writing some about Yuri as an archivist of the movement. And I'm trying to finish this book now about Dhoruba bin Wahad, and I'm calling it a bio archive. I'm using some material from the Freedom Archive, but a lot of other material that they collected, and it's telling his story through some writing that I'm doing in the third person, some of his parts of his unpublished, incomplete autobiography, some of his political writings, and a lot of the documentary material, and arranging all of those in a way that tells the story of his time in the Panthers and in prison and that whole story. So that's a sort of experiment with like how to use the archival form as a mode of political education. I went to library school, but for some reason, maybe it's because I was just so focused on what I was doing, I was not thinking, as I was building the archive to make the book, I was not thinking of, okay, how do I then create something that people can then plug back into, right? So that the hopefully people will follow the sources, and you know, I get emails all the time, can you send me this, can you send me that, which I do, but it hasn't been systematized in this way. So yeah, that's another thing I could have done better. But yeah, my forthcoming work definitely engages with this question of the archive, thinking through Yuri and working with Dhoruba's project, and hopefully other stuff as well. So I look forward to talking to you more about that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Diane, for this interesting question. Thank you, Ori, for your insights. We have another question, I believe, from Jose Hamza Saldana. If you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, first, Ari, very grateful that you did this. Um, and I want to say that this book is banned in New York State prison system. But if I was still in prison, I would find a way to smuggle it. Believe that. I would find a way to smuggle it in. And I'm sure others is thinking the same way. But there's a couple of things I'd like to say. But one thing in particular, because you Senator Attica, and I think that was brilliantly done. Unfortunately, the Attica brothers, which I'm very connected to them, I have co-defendants that were part of the rebellion. They were shot during the rebellion. And there's very few of them left. I mean, so this story has to continue, and the lessons, more importantly, the lessons learned from the Attica rebellion, because, the media, they by design portrayed it as a reformist movement. I don't see it that way, not from the brothers that I'm close with. L.D. Barkley says that we have made our demands, that prisons only serve one purpose. So that in itself is an abolitionist statement, and these were perhaps his last words. So I would hope that you, not to put so much on you that you're already burdened with so much, but because you have the talent, that awesome talent that you have, to continue this and tell the stories. We'll get them to the people that need to hear it, read it, but to continue and continue to guide with the lessons that we have learned from Attica.
Thank you so much, Brother Hamza. It's an honor. Thank you. I will do my best.
This was an amazing moment, honestly. I was just looking up your profile, and I mean, we're very happy to have you with us. It's an honor. I believe Ori is honored by your presence, and we all are. It's just wonderful to have individuals such as yourselves who are fighting for prison reform, who are fighting for better, for more justice for African Americans, to be with us in this conversation. I don't think we have any other questions, so I don't know, John, if you would like to conclude.
I don't have much to add. Just thank you. Thank you, Ori, so much for the book. We all will have so much more to think about as we read it, reread it, and continue to talk about it. Thanks so much, Yosra. Charisse had to run, but obviously thanks to her. Thank you so much, Matef. And thanks to Robin too, who couldn't make it, but who again is kind of with us in spirit. So. We'll be back in the series, as I said, with the Life After Cars, with the next book, a very different book that we'll be having a different conversation another time. But today, there's just a lot, I think, that I'll be taking with me just to continue to think about all the insights of this book and the way that it will help me in this conversation too. Like I'm just very, very grateful. Lots to, or you said it best, kind of need some time for this all to wash over you. That's exactly what I will be doing as well as I come away from this. So thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for participating. Take care.